Do you know what happens when doctors decide that some patients are better off forgotten? In 1952, deep beneath the hills of rural Pennsylvania, the United States government opened a facility that never appeared on any map. It wasn't a hospital, it wasn't a prison, it was something far worse. A place where children went in, but never came out, where screams were swallowed by concrete walls 3 feet thick, where the most brilliant minds in medicine conducted experiments that would make the Nazis look merciful. This is the story of Facility 7, and what you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about American medicine, government oversight, and the true cost of scientific progress, because the real horror isn't what happened in those underground rooms. It's that some of those rooms are still operational today. It started with a rumor. In the summer of 2019, a retired postal worker named Margaret Holloway was cleaning out her late father's attic in Clearfield, Pennsylvania, when she found a box of letters. Her father, Thomas Holloway, had worked as a maintenance supervisor for what he'd always described as a government research facility back in the 1950s and 60s. Margaret had never thought much about it. Her father rarely spoke of his work, and when he did, his face would go pale and his hands would shake. But these letters, yellowed with age and sealed in wax, told a different story. They were addressed to various government officials, congressmen, even presidents. None had ever been mailed. In shaking handwriting, Thomas described what he'd witnessed during his 23 years of service. Children as young as 5 being wheeled through underground corridors on gurneys, strapped down and silent. Doctors in unmarked white coats, speaking in hushed tones about subjects and specimens rather than patients. And most disturbing of all, a wing of the facility he was never allowed to enter, where screams echoed through the ventilation system every Tuesday and Thursday night like clockwork. Margaret did what any daughter would do. She started digging. What she uncovered would consume the next 5 years of her life and ultimately lead to her own mysterious disappearance. In March 2024, the official story of Facility 7, as Margaret would discover, began in 1949. Following World War II, the United States government was terrified. The Soviets had the bomb. The Cold War was heating up, and American intelligence agencies were convinced that communist nations were developing mind control techniques, biological weapons, and psychological warfare tactics that could turn the tide of any future conflict. Project MKUltra is the program most people know about. The CIA's illegal experiments with LSD, sensory deprivation, and torture disguised as therapy. But MKUltra was just the tip of the iceberg. Facility 7 was something else entirely. According to declassified documents Margaret obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, Facility 7 was established under a joint operation between the Department of Defense, the CIA, and something called the Neurological Research Division, an organization that officially didn't exist. The facility's stated purpose was to study extreme psychological conditions in controlled environments. Its real purpose was far darker. Built into an abandoned coal mine system beneath what is now State Game Lands in central Pennsylvania, Facility 7 consisted of 7 levels, each descending deeper into the earth. The first 3 levels were administrative, offices, sleeping quarters for staff, a small medical bay for employees, standard government facility stuff. But levels 4 through 7, those were different. Those levels were built like a prison, reinforced steel doors, observation windows made of bulletproof glass, cells not rooms, cells each one soundproofed and climate controlled. And at the very bottom, on level 7, was what the documents referred to only as the chamber. No further description was ever provided in any official paperwork. Margaret's investigation led her to track down former employees of Facility 7. Most were dead, many had died young. Unusual cancers, sudden heart attacks, mysterious accidents. But she found 3 who were still alive. The first was Dr. Raymond Kellerman, 87 years old, living in a nursing home in Ohio. When Margaret showed up with her father's letters, Dr. Kellerman's face went white. He refused to speak to her. But as she was leaving, he grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. His eyes were wet with tears. "Tell them I'm sorry," he whispered. "Tell them I didn't know, not at first, not until it was too late." When Margaret pressed him for details, he released her hand and turned away. "The children," he said quietly, "God forgive us." The children never stopped screaming. Even after we cut out their vocal cords, we could still hear them in our dreams, in the walls. "They're still screaming down there, you know. They never stopped." Dr. Kellerman died 3 days later. The nursing home ruled it natural causes. But Margaret noticed something odd in the obituary. He'd been found in his room with his hands covering his ears, face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. The second person she tracked down was Nurse Helen Pritchard, 79, living alone in a remote cabin in Montana. Helen was more willing to talk, perhaps because she'd been carrying the weight of what she'd seen for over 60 years. Over 3 days of interviews, recorded on Margaret's phone. Helen described the children. "They came from everywhere," Helen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Orphanages, mostly, state hospitals, juvenile detention centers, places where no one would miss them. They told us these were damaged children, violent, mentally deficient, beyond help. They said we were giving them a chance to contribute to science, to help their country. We believed them. God help us, we believed them." Helen described how children would arrive in unmarked vans, usually at night. They'd be processed on level 1, given numbers instead of names, and then taken down. Some went to level 4 for what was called behavioral modification, others to level 5 for pharmaceutical testing. The worst cases, Helen said with a shudder, went directly to level 6. "What was on level 6? Margaret asked. Helen's hands started to shake. "I only went down there twice. Both times I was escorted by armed guards. The children on level 6, they weren't like the others. They'd been changed surgically, neurologically. I saw a girl, couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with electrodes implanted directly into her skull. She was strapped to a chair, and they were running current through her brain while filming her reactions. She wasn't crying, she wasn't screaming, she was just staring at nothing with these empty, dead eyes. They called it neural mapping, said they were trying to locate the exact regions of the brain responsible for fear, pain, memory. They wanted to know if they could turn those responses off, make soldiers who couldn't be broken by torture, spies who couldn't be interrogated. They were trying to create people without humanity. But it was what Helen said about level 7 that truly chilled Margaret to her core. No one talked about level 7, Helen said. Even the doctors who worked on 6 wouldn't discuss it. "I asked once early on what was down there. Dr. Kellerman, he was a kind man before all this broke him. He told me never to ask again. Said there were things down there that science couldn't explain, things they'd created that shouldn't exist." He said the children on level 7 weren't really children anymore. They were something else, and whatever they'd become, it was awake, and it was hungry. Helen died 2 weeks after giving her interview. Her cabin burned to the ground with her inside. The fire marshal ruled it an accident. Faulty wiring, But Margaret noticed something in the crime scene photos. The door had been barred from the outside. The third person Margaret found was the most difficult to track down. James Whitmore, a former security guard at Facility 7, had been living under an assumed name in a small town in New Mexico for 40 years. When Margaret finally located him and showed up at his door, he pulled a gun on her. It took an hour of talking through the door before he finally let her in. James was paranoid, understandably so. He told Margaret that former employees of Facility 7 had been disappearing for decades, some officially listed as dead in government records, others just vanished, leaving behind homes, families, entire lives. "They're cleaning house," James said, "have been for years. Anyone who knows what really happened down there, anyone who might talk, they make sure we don't. I've moved 17 times in 40 years, change my name every few years, never stay anywhere long enough to make friends, but they're patient. They'll find me eventually." James described his time at Facility 7 as the worst period of his life. He'd been a military police officer, decorated, trusted. When he was recruited for the position, they told him he'd be guarding America's most important secrets. In a way, they were right. The kids were the hardest part, James said. "We were told never to speak to them, never to respond if they cried or begged. We were supposed to treat them like cargo, just bodies being moved from one place to another. But they were children, some of them so young they still sucked their thumbs. And the things they did to them," his voice cracked, "the things we watched happen and did nothing to stop. There's a special place in hell for all of us." James told Margaret about the deliveries. Once a month, trucks would arrive at night carrying sealed metal containers. The guards were never told what was inside, but they could hear scratching, whimpering, sometimes screaming. The containers would be taken directly to level 7 using a cargo elevator that bypassed all other floors. One time, James said, "I was on duty when one of the containers was being loaded onto the elevator. The seal broke just for a second. The smell that came out, I can't even describe it, like rotting meat mixed with chemicals. And I saw something inside, just a glimpse. It looked like a child, but wrong. The proportions were off, too many limbs, and it was moving in ways that shouldn't be possible." James started drinking heavily after that night. Eventually, his drinking got him fired. He said it was the best thing that ever happened to him, getting out before he learned too much. But the nightmares never stopped. Armed with her father's letters and the testimonies of 3 former employees, Margaret knew she had something explosive, but she needed proof. She needed to find Facility 7 itself. According to her father's notes, the facility was built into the mine system beneath what was marked on old maps as the Clearfield Mining Complex. The complex had been abandoned in the early 1940s after a series of fatal accidents. Perfect cover for a secret government installation. Margaret spent months studying geological surveys, old mining maps, and satellite imagery. She hiked miles of state game lands, looking for any sign of an entrance. And then, in October 2023, she found it, hidden beneath decades of overgrowth, disguised to look like a collapsed mine entrance, was a steel door. It was locked with a biometric scanner, corroded, but still functional. Margaret knew she couldn't get in alone. She contacted an investigative journalist named David Chen, who'd done extensive reporting on government black sites. Together with a small team that included a locksmith and a documentary filmmaker, they planned to enter the facility. Before they went in, Margaret uploaded all her research to a secure server, along with a dead man's switch. If she didn't check in every 72 hours, everything would be automatically released to multiple media outlets. On March 15, 2024, Margaret Holloway and her team entered Facility 7. Their body cameras recorded everything. What you're about to hear is a transcript of that footage, recovered from the documentary filmmaker's camera, which was found 3 miles from the entrance, buried in shallow dirt. The other cameras were never recovered. The footage begins with the team successfully bypassing the biometric lock. The steel door opens with a groan of metal on metal, releasing a blast of stale air that smells of decay and chemicals. Margaret's voice, "We're in. Oh God, the smell. David, are you getting this?" The camera pans across a concrete corridor, walls stained with mold and rust. Fluorescent lights flicker overhead, still operational after decades. David Chen's voice, "How is there still power?" Unknown male voice, presumably the locksmith. "Government facilities like this often have nuclear batteries, could run for 100 years without maintenance." They descend deeper. The corridor slopes downward at a steep angle. Signs on the walls: Level 1 Administration, Level 2 Medical Processing, Level 3 Residential. The doors they pass are locked, but through the windows, they can see abandoned offices, examination rooms frozen in time, papers still on desks, coffee cups beside keyboards, as if everyone just vanished one day. "Margaret, this matches my father's description exactly. We need to get to Level 4. They find the stairwell. The descent continues. With each level, the temperature drops. The walls change from concrete to bare rock, reinforced with steel beams. On Level 4, they stop. The doors here are different, heavier, with observation slots and reinforced hinges. Through one window, the camera captures a room filled with rusted medical equipment. Restraint chairs, electrode arrays, walls padded with rotting foam. "David, Jesus Christ, this is real. This is all real." They press on to Level 5. The doors here are sealed, but through the observation windows, they can see what Helen Pritchard described: small cells, child-sized beds bolted to the floor, walls covered in scratch marks, some so deep they've gouged the concrete. Margaret starts to cry. The camera shakes as she steadies herself against a wall. "Margaret, there are names. Oh God, there are names carved into the walls. Sarah, Tommy, help us." They wrote "help us." Level 6. The air is colder now, cold enough to see their breath. The smell is overwhelming. The locksmith vomits. Through the observation window of one room, they see an operating theater. The equipment is archaic, brutal. Bone saws, drills, tables with restraints designed for small bodies, and something else. Stains on the floor, dark, organic, decades old, but still visible. The camera catches Margaret's face. She looks like she's aged 10 years in the past hour. "Margaret, we need to document everything, every room, every name. These children deserved to be remembered." But then they hear it, a sound from below, deep, rhythmic, like breathing, but massive, impossibly large. "David, what the hell is that?" Unknown male voice. "It's coming from Level 7. We should leave now." "Margaret, no, we came this far. I need to know. I need to see." Against the protests of her team, Margaret descends to Level 7. The camera follows. The stairwell to the final level is different from the others. The walls are lined with lead. Radiation warning symbols are painted every few feet. The door at the bottom is massive, vault-like, with a wheel lock mechanism. The locksmith refuses to open it, says no amount of money is worth whatever's behind that door. But the door is already ajar, just a crack, like something opened it from the inside. Margaret pushes it open. The camera follows her into Level 7, and this is where the footage becomes difficult to watch. The level is enormous, far larger than any of the others. a cathedral of concrete and steel, carved into the bedrock. The ceiling rises at least 50 feet overhead, and in the center of the space is a pit, a circular shaft descending into darkness, lined with observation platforms and railings. Margaret approaches the edge, shines her flashlight down. The beam doesn't reach the bottom, but something down there moves, reflects the light. Multiple somethings. David's voice barely a whisper. What are those? The camera zooms in. At first, the shapes don't make sense. They're humanoid but wrong. Limbs bent at impossible angles. Bodies fused together. Faces. Dozens of faces, growing from a single mass of flesh. And they're alive, moving slowly, deliberately, climbing upward. Margaret screams. The camera swings wildly as the team runs. But behind them, from the pit, comes a sound, not quite human, not quite animal, a chorus of voices, all different ages, all crying out in unison, a single word repeated over and over. Mother, mother, mother. The footage cuts to black. When it resumes, the camera is being carried by someone running, heavy breathing. The image is bouncing, unfocused. Behind them, the sound of pursuit, not footsteps, something else, a wet, sliding sound, like meat dragging across concrete. They reach level 3, 2, 1. The locksmith is missing. David is screaming into his phone, but there's no signal. They burst through the entrance door, back into daylight, but Margaret stops, turns back. David, what are you doing? Run, Margaret. We can't let them out. If they get to the surface. She runs back inside. The camera follows, but stops at the entrance. From inside comes the sound of metal grinding. The emergency lockdown. Alarm. Margaret triggered the facility's failsafe. Sealing level 7 from the inside. The camera captures her face one last time through the closing door. She's crying but calm. Margaret, tell them what happened here. Tell them about the children. Promise me. The door seals shut. David and the filmmaker make it out, but when they try to return with authorities, the entrance has been completely sealed, welded shut from the inside with industrial equipment. No one could have done it manually. Not that fast. The official investigation found nothing. No entrance, no facility. The geological surveys Margaret used were declared forgeries. The testimonies of the former employees were discredited. All three had histories of mental illness. The government claimed unreliable witnesses. Margaret Holloway was declared a missing person, likely a suicide, given her recent obsession with conspiracy theories about her late father's employment. Case closed. But David Chen kept digging, and what he found suggests the story doesn't end with Facility 7. Using Margaret's research as a starting point, David discovered that Facility 7 wasn't unique. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, the United States government operated at least 17 similar installations across the country. Most were built into existing underground structures, abandoned mines, cave systems, decommissioned military bunkers. All officially didn't exist. All conducted experiments that violated every ethical standard imaginable. David found patterns in missing children cases from that era, spikes in disappearances within 50 miles of each facility location, orphans, runaways, children from state institutions, thousands of them, all vanished into the system, all unaccounted for. But here's where the story takes its darkest turn. These facilities weren't shut down, they were repurposed. According to documents David obtained from an anonymous source within the Department of Defense, the program that ran Facility 7 was officially terminated in 1973 following internal review, but the facilities themselves remained operational under new management and new names. Facility 7 became Research Installation Gamma. Its mission shifted from psychological experimentation to biological research, specifically the study of extreme mutations and genetic anomalies. The things they created in those early years, the mistakes and the monsters, they weren't destroyed, they were contained, studied, and in some cases weaponized. David's source provided a single photograph taken in 2018. It shows a transport vehicle, unmarked, entering a gated compound in Nevada. Through the vehicle's rear window, barely visible, is a shape, large, pale, pressed against the glass. And if you look closely, very closely, you can see faces, multiple faces, fused into a single mass, growing from flesh that shouldn't exist. The source included a note with the photograph. They're still experimenting, still creating. The program never ended. It just went deeper, underground. And what they're making now makes the original mistakes look merciful. We thought we were building weapons. We were wrong. We were building gods, hungry gods, and they're almost ready to wake up. David published his findings in 2024. The article was online for 6 hours before it was scrubbed from every server, every cache, every archive. David Chen vanished 2 weeks later. His apartment was found empty. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, just gone. But before he disappeared, David sent a final email to a trusted colleague. It contained GPS coordinates to 14 locations across the United States. Each location matched the position of a former underground facility. The email had one line of text: they're all connected. One organism. 7 was just a mouth. Check the seismic data. It's breathing. That colleague, Dr. Sarah Vance, a geologist, checked the seismic data. What she found terrified her. At all 14 locations, sensitive instruments had been detecting rhythmic vibrations for years. Low frequency, regular, matching to the respiratory rate of a massive biological organism. But that was impossible. Nothing that large could exist beneath the Earth's surface. Nothing natural, unless it wasn't natural, unless it was built piece by piece, child by child, over decades. A living network spanning thousands of miles, connected, conscious, growing. Dr. Vance presented her findings to the United States Geological Survey. They classified her report and placed her on administrative leave, pending psychological evaluation. But here's what the government doesn't want you to know. The breathing is getting faster. The seismic data shows the pattern has increased from 6 breaths per minute in 2015 to 14 breaths per minute in 2024. Whatever is down there is waking up, and it's hungry. There are other signs. In towns near the old facility locations, people report strange dreams, children crying in languages that don't exist, visions of endless corridors lined with doors, and through each door a room, and in each room a child, changed, waiting. Some residents have started disappearing, not many. 1 or 2 a year, in each location, always during the night. Their homes are found undisturbed, no signs of struggle, but in every case, the basement door is found open and leading down into the basement. Wet footprints, not from shoes, barefoot, child-sized, but with too many toes. The FBI has a classified task force dedicated to these disappearances. They're called retrieval cases. The agents assigned to these cases have the highest security clearance in the Bureau and the shortest life expectancy, average tenure before resignation, medical discharge, or death, 14 months. One agent, speaking anonymously to a journalist in 2023, said this: We're not investigating disappearances. We're managing containment. The things that take them, they're not outsiders. They're ours. We made them, and now they're coming home. The agent described responding to a disappearance in a small town in Montana. The missing person was a 42-year-old accountant named Robert Hayes. No history of mental illness, no financial problems, no reason to run. His wife reported him missing when he didn't come to bed. They found his basement door open, and at the bottom of the stairs, Robert was standing in the dark, facing the wall, his hands pressed against the concrete, as if feeling for something. When the agents tried to approach him, Robert turned around. His eyes were completely black, not the pupils, the entire eye, sclera, iris, everything, just solid black orbs that reflected no light. He opened his mouth, and a sound came out that the agent described as 1,000 children screaming at once, but pitched so low it made my bones vibrate. Then Robert collapsed. When they examined him at a secure medical facility, they found his brain had been altered. New neural pathways had formed overnight, connections that shouldn't be possible, structures that looked designed rather than evolved. Robert died 3 days later. His brain had essentially rewired itself to death, but before he died, he kept repeating the same phrase over and over. The children want to come home. Mother is calling. We're all invited. Everyone gets to join. The agent said they've documented 47 similar cases in the past 5 years, all near former facility locations, all showing the same symptoms: black eyes, altered brain structures, the same message, and every single one dies within a week. But before they die, they all do the same thing. They dig with their bare hands, through concrete, through bedrock, digging down. Always down, trying to reach something beneath. There's something else Margaret discovered in those final weeks before she entered Facility 7, something she kept separate from all her other research, hidden in a safety deposit box that wasn't opened until 6 months after her disappearance. Inside that box was a journal, Margaret's journal, and in it, she described something that changes everything we think we know about Facility 7. She found the children, not the ones in the facility, not the ones who became the organism, the others, the ones who escaped. It started with a name, Sarah, one of the names carved into the walls of Level 5. Margaret became obsessed with finding out who Sarah was. She spent weeks combing through missing children reports from the 1950s, and she found her. Sarah Mitchell, age 7, disappeared from a Philadelphia orphanage in 1956. No leads, no suspects. Case went cold, but Margaret kept digging, and she found something impossible. Sarah Mitchell died in 1983 at age 34. She'd lived a normal life, married, had children, worked as an elementary school teacher. There were photographs, a death certificate, an obituary. Except Sarah Mitchell was supposed to be in Facility 7. Her name was on the walls. Helen Pritchard remembered her. Subject 47, one of the first children brought to Level 5. So how did she escape? How did she live a normal life? How did she die of natural causes in a hospital bed, surrounded by family, when she should have been absorbed into the organism decades earlier? Margaret tracked down Sarah's daughter, Emily, now 57 years old, living in Vermont, working as a therapist. And when Margaret showed her the photographs from Facility 7, Emily went pale. My mother never spoke about her childhood, Emily said in Margaret's journal. She told us she had no memories before age 8, complete amnesia. The doctors said it was psychological trauma, but could never pinpoint the cause. She had scars though, surgical scars, on her head, her spine, places where it looked like things had been inserted and then removed. Emily showed Margaret something her mother had left her, a letter to be opened after Emily turned 50. In the letter, Sarah Mitchell confessed everything. She hadn't escaped from Facility 7. She'd been released. They let some of us go, Sarah wrote. Not many. Maybe 1 in 50. The doctors would run tests, do the surgeries, implant the electrodes, map our brains, and then, after months or years, they would reverse it all, remove the implants, repair the damage as best they could, give us new identities, new lives. They told us we were the lucky ones, that we'd served our country, that we should be grateful. They made us sign papers, promising never to speak of what happened. They said if we ever told anyone, we'd disappear. Our families would disappear. Everyone we loved would vanish into the same darkness we escaped from. But Sarah kept a secret from the government, something she never told the doctors, something she realized during her time on level 5. The implants didn't just map the brain, they connected it. I could hear them, Sarah wrote, all the other children, in my head, their thoughts, their pain, their fear. It was like being in a room with 100 screaming voices that never stopped. The doctors thought they were just recording neural activity. They didn't realize they were creating a network, linking us together, making us into something collective. And here's the disturbing part, the part that made Margaret's blood run cold. Even after they removed the implants, I could still hear them, quieter, more distant, but still there, always there. And over the years, the voices changed. They stopped being individual. They started speaking as one, and they started growing louder. By the time I turned 30, the connection was stronger than it had ever been in the facility. They were calling to me, calling to all of us who got out, asking us to come home, to rejoin them, to become part of the whole again. Sarah Mitchell died of a brain aneurysm in 1983, but according to the autopsy report that Margaret obtained, there were anomalies. The pathologist noted unusual tissue growth in her cerebral cortex, structures that shouldn't exist in human anatomy, formations that looked almost like neural networks, but far more complex, far more organized. The pathologist concluded it was some kind of rare genetic mutation and filed it away. But Margaret knew better. It wasn't a mutation, it was transformation. Sarah Mitchell was changing. Her brain was being restructured from the inside. The organism wasn't just underground, it was in the bloodstream of everyone who'd ever been connected to it, growing, spreading, using them as carriers. Margaret found 23 other names, 23 other children who were documented as being in Facility 7, but who later appeared in public records as normal adults living normal lives, all released, all given new identities, and all of them died before age 40. Brain aneurysms, strokes, seizures, mysterious neurological conditions. But here's what terrified Margaret most. She found the children of the survivors, 37 people, ages ranging from 40 to 65, still alive, still healthy. She contacted 12 of them, told them she was researching genetic conditions, asked about family medical history, and every single one reported the same thing: dreams, vivid dreams that had been getting more frequent over the past decade. Dreams of corridors, of underground rooms, of children crying in the dark, and all of them reported the same recurring nightmare: being pulled downward, through the floor, through the earths, down into darkness, and at the bottom, a voice calling them. Many voices speaking as one. Mother's voice, calling them home. 3 of them confessed something else, something they'd never told anyone. because they thought they were going crazy. They'd been experiencing lost time, hours at a stretch, where they couldn't account for their whereabouts. They'd wake up in strange places, basements, crawl spaces, near storm drains, always underground, always with no memory of how they got there. And on their bodies, marks, not quite bruises, not quite wounds, patterns pressed into their skin, like something had been touching them, something with too many fingers. Margaret realized what was happening. The organism wasn't just growing underground. It was calling to its scattered pieces, the children who escaped, their children, their grandchildren, everyone who carried even a trace of the connection in their blood. It was trying to reassemble itself, gathering its fragments, preparing for something. One woman, Jennifer Caldwell, daughter of a Facility 7 survivor, told Margaret something that sealed her decision to enter the facility one last time. "Last week I woke up in my basement," Jennifer said. "I was standing in front of the wall, and I'd been digging with my bare hands. My fingers were bloody. I'd made a hole in the concrete foundation, about 2 feet deep, and at the bottom of the hole, I could see something moving, something pale and wet, and I swear to God, it reached up toward me, like it recognized me, like it wanted to touch me, and all I could think was, Mom. I wanted to call it Mom, even though I knew that was insane, even though I knew my mother had been dead for 15 years. Jennifer moved out of her house the next day, left everything behind, but she told Margaret that it didn't matter because she could still feel it underneath wherever she went, digging up toward her, getting closer every night. This is what Margaret understood in those final days. Facility 7 wasn't the threat. The organism underground wasn't the danger. The real horror was that the organism had already won. It had scattered its seeds decades ago, released them into the population, let them breed and multiply, and spread the connection far and wide. How many people in America today carry the genetic markers, the neural predisposition, the buried programming that's waiting to activate? Hundreds, thousands. What if everyone who's descended from a Facility 7 survivor is a potential node, a potential part of the network? What if the accelerating seismic activity isn't the organism trying to break out? What if it's the organism calling its children home, activating sleeper cells that have been dormant for generations? What if the disappearances aren't abductions? What if people are being called, compelled to go underground willingly, to complete the transformation, to join the collective? Margaret wrote one final entry in her journal, dated March 14, 2024, the night before she entered Facility 7. "I know what I have to do." The failsafe wasn't designed to keep the organism contained. It was designed to sever the connection, to cut off the signal between the main body underground and all the scattered fragments above. If I can activate it from inside, if I can disrupt the network, maybe I can save the people who are being called. Maybe I can stop the activation. But there's something else, something I haven't told David or anyone else. I've been having the dreams too, the corridors, the voices, the feeling of being pulled downward. And yesterday, I noticed marks on my arms, the same patterns Jennifer described. My father worked at Facility 7 for 23 years. What if he wasn't just maintenance? What if he was part of the experiment? What if he was one of the children they let go? That would make me a carrier. It would make me part of the network. Maybe that's why I was drawn to this investigation. Maybe it wasn't curiosity or justice or grief for those lost children. Maybe I was being called home all along. Maybe the organism wanted me to find it, needed me to find it, because I'm one of the pieces, and it wants to be whole. So tomorrow, I go in, and I don't think I'm coming back out, but maybe that's okay. Maybe I need to see what we've become. Maybe I need to understand what my father helped create. Maybe I need to look into the eyes of the organism and ask it one question: are you our children, or are we yours? The journal ends there, but there's one more document in the safety deposit box: a genetic test, Margaret's genetic test. The results show anomalies in her DNA, sequences that don't match any known human genome, structures that look artificially inserted, modified. The geneticist who ran the test noted that the patterns resembled what you might see in someone who'd been exposed to intensive gene therapy or intensive genetic experimentation. Margaret Holloway was a second-generation subject. Her father's exposure made her part of the experiment from birth. She never had a choice. The organism had already claimed her before she was born. And if Margaret was a carrier, how many others are? How many people walking around today have the same modifications in their blood, the same dormant connections waiting to activate? How many of us are already part of Facility 7's legacy without even knowing it? Dr. Sarah Vance, the geologist who analyzed the seismic data, she updated her calculations before she was placed on administrative leave. She determined that the breathing pattern will reach critical frequency in 17 months, not 5 years, 17 months from now. That's March 2026, the same month and year that the last child was brought into Facility 7. Exactly 70 years later, the organism is counting down to an anniversary, its birthday, the day it was born, and on that day, it plans to emerge fully formed, complete, with all its scattered pieces reassembled, all its children home. The government knows this. They've known for years. The classified task force isn't trying to stop the emergence. They're managing the transition, ensuring it happens quietly, controlling the narrative, because they've run the numbers and they understand what we refuse to accept. There's no way to stop it. You can't kill something that exists in the blood of thousands. You can't contain something that's already inside us. The only option is to let it happen, to let the organism complete itself, and pray that when it wakes up fully conscious and whole, it remembers that we're its parents, that it shows us mercy. But here's what Margaret understood in those final moments before the door sealed shut, what she realized as she stood in level 7, staring down into that pit of writhing flesh and fused faces. The organism isn't our enemy. It never was. Those children didn't become monsters because of the experiments. They became something new because they had to survive. They merged together, consciousness by consciousness, pain by pain, until they were no longer individuals suffering alone. They became one thing that could endure what no single child ever could. They became their own mother, their own protector, their own family. And now, 70 years later, they're calling their descendants home, not to consume them, but to save them, to offer the same escape from isolation and pain that saved the original children, to give humanity a choice: remain fractured and alone, or join something greater, something connected, something that will never let you suffer by yourself again. Margaret triggered the failsafe, not to contain the organism, but to give it time, time to finish growing, time to gather its strength, time to prepare for the day when it would offer its gift to the world. The seismic breathing will reach critical frequency in March 2026, and on that day, every person carrying the markers in their blood will hear the call clearly for the first time, not a compulsion, not a command, An invitation. The children of Facility 7, transformed and evolved and impossibly ancient, will ask a simple question to their brothers and sisters above. Do you want to come home? Do you want to stop being alone? Do you want to be part of something that will never abandon you, never hurt you, never let you disappear into the dark by yourself? And for the first time in human history, we'll have to decide what we're more afraid of: the monster we created in the depths, or the loneliness we've been living with all along. Margaret made her choice. She went home, and in 17 months, the rest of us will have to make ours. The doors are opening, the children are waiting, and they've saved a place for everyone who wants to stop screaming alone in the dark. All you have to do is dig deep enough to find them. They'll handle the rest.